Hey listeners, last year was our 15th year of the best in food storytelling. As we head into 2025, we're kicking off a contest in collaboration with the podcast series Feast and Harmony and Sixth Man, where you have the opportunity to win a 4-night cruise for 2 on Chefs Making Waves, a food, wine, and spirits festival at sea. When you donate to HRN, you'll be entered for the chance to win a porthole cabin for 2 on Chefs Making Waves, sailing May 5th through 9th, 2025, from Miami to Cozumel, Mexico on Norwegian Gem. You'll also support another year of great food storytelling with a portion of your donation going toward disaster relief for the food and beverage communities within Western North Carolina and Southern California. This cruise is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for culinary adventurers, featuring top celebrity chefs including Jonathan Waxman, Antonio Lafaso, Robert Irvine, and many, many more. There's a myriad of experiences such as restaurant takeovers, live food and mixology demos, themed parties, and more. To enter your chance to win, please visit heritageradionetwork.org/cruise. Terms and conditions apply. You must be 21 or over to enter. That's heritageradionetwork.org/cruise.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. There's a reason when you think of Wisconsin, you think cheese. Cheese is a huge part of Wisconsin's history and future. In Wisconsin, the state of cheese, the tradition of cheese-making excellence began 180 years ago, before Wisconsin was recognized as a state. Immigrants traveled to settle in this lush green hills of Wisconsin, bringing their cheese-making traditions with them. These storied skills, combined with the freshest milk available, created a cheese-making culture that is uniquely Wisconsin. Wisconsin's 1,200 cheesemakers, many of whom are third and fourth generation, continue to pass on old world traditions while adopting modern innovations in cheese-making craftsmanship. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
Hey everyone, Greg Benson here, and if you're a regular listener of The Speakeasy, you probably know by now that I've been working to bring 100% pure, actually good-tasting agave nectar to the United States for a minute. But I wanted to give you a bit of an update. I actually got to travel to the farm where these amazing plants have been growing for decades, and it was just a genuinely moving experience. I got to see these agave in their natural habitat and see what it means to Rogelio, the farmer, to be able to care for the descendants of the same agave that his grandfather was growing almost a full century ago. That's why I'm proud to announce Quixote Imports, a new venture that's dedicated to preserving these agave and, yes, still bringing in the same fantastic, earthy, lightly fruity agave nectar that's going to make you wonder why you've been wasting your time with the crap at the grocery store. Plus, our fans here at the Speakeasy can get free shipping at checkout with promo code SPEAKEASY, so don't wait. Head on over to quixoteimports.com and see what agave nectar is actually supposed to taste like, and use promo code SPEAKEASY for free shipping. Salud.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
So you don't charm the devil with your rock and roll load. Knows that country music's gonna save your soul. The devil runs his groove in them rhythm and blues that sound. It's gonna get you sun in the air.
Welcome back to The Speakeasy. I'm Damon Boelte.
I'm Sother Teague.
And I'm Greg Benson. And Damon, what's going on, man?
Oh, man, not a whole lot. I mean, or just a whole lot. It depends on how you want to say it. This happened last year where, the beginning of the year I didn't really think there was going to be, it didn't seem like such an eventful year, but it ended up like 2024 just zoomed right by. And I saw the 1,000-mile stare out into the rest of the year. In like January and February. And I was like, oh my God, I've got this entire year booked already. And the part of that was like, Greg, you've been working really hard on the schedule for the Speakeasy, getting our guests booked out like far in advance, to some disdain for some guests that are like, wait, we have to wait 6 months to be on the show? Like, damn.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're popular, everyone.
We're popular. We're award-winning podcast, whatever. But it's feeling that way already, which I don't mind, because it's nice to know that there's like cool stuff on the horizon. For instance, last week we had our buddy Ben from Seasoned Bitters. Really interesting show. A lot of cool knowledge into like the world of non-alcoholic spirits, but specifically non-alcoholic bitters. I'm actually going to be going out to London to visit in late April or early May, between our good friend Robbie Nelson's wedding and Grand Army's 10-year anniversary party. So we're going to pop over to London. And mainly, I don't know if my wife knows this yet, but we're going to be going to Stonehenge. And I'm a big Ancient Alien fan. So, I like Ancient Alien type stuff. And, I'm just going to sneak that in onto the side. But, there's obviously a lot of things that we got to do in London. One thing that I'm kind of bummed about is we were looking at Duke's, and it seems that they're going to be closed for renovations during the time that we're there. So if that's the case, no Duke's Martini.
Which is a drag. That would be a bummer for me, because I think that's one of my favorite drinking experiences I've ever had in my life. And I've had it more than once. And you've never even been to London, so this was a huge miss for you.
Yeah, that's the craziest thing.
I don't mean to rub salt in the wound. This is new news to me.
Well, it's new to me too. I feel like I haven't. I mean, when I was younger, I was a total mod. I owned a scooter shop. Vespas, Lambrettas, Quadrophenia style with lights and mirrors everywhere. Everyone knows me as like the oaky country rock guy, but they drinks Fernet.
Oh no, I've seen the GQ photo shoot of you looking like fucking Rivers Cuomo from Weezer. I'm familiar with previous eras of Damon.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I'm a huge Stones and Beatles and Small Faces fan and all that stuff. So yeah, I'm shocked that I still haven't been. I've been all over a lot of the world, and I've been very close. I've been to Scotland. I don't know, for some reason I have never been to London. So we're going to be going there, and like I said, I'm going to try and sneak in Stonehenge. But another place that I want to go to that I had to turn down a trip to Peru, and while being there, I was supposed to go to Machu Picchu, another Ancient Aliens destination type thing. So in the spirit of that, and this is the weirdest segue into an episode,
I think this is our best work in months, if not years, actually.
Yeah. We should talk about Peru. We should talk about Pisco, I guess.
Let's talk about Peru and Pisco. And fortunately for us, we have Alex Hildebrandt in the studio today from Suyo Pisco, who can talk about Pisco, Ancient Aliens. I don't know, maybe, possibly. We can get into that if we have time at the end of the show, but definitely excited to rap about Pisco with you, man. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, welcome
Alex.
Thank you for having me. If we end up talking for an hour about Ancient Aliens, I will be perfectly happy.
Great. So, where are you right now? You said you're in Boston, Massachusetts, right?
Yep, that's right. I tend to move around a little bit, but home base for me is Boston.
Okay, cool. So I was wondering, there's been some just before we get into Pisco, there's been some kind of big changes in Boston, over the past few years. I mean, drink closed. It seems, there's a lot of new spots that have opened. Do you get out much? Whenever you're traveling around, do you go to the cocktail bars and restaurants and kind of see what's happening in the market?
Yeah, quite a bit.
Definitely, I know that was a joke.
Definitely part of the job. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you've experienced it from afar or had a chance to come here really in the past, I'd say 2 years. There's been this really significant push in, I guess push has a negative connotation. I'd say a revival or a really growth in the cocktail scene in Boston, which is really, really exciting. And not just cocktail scene, I would say overall gastronomy. There's just been, it feels like every day I'm reading an eater that there's a new restaurant opening up. It's not just, kind of your average new American sort of run-of-the-mill things that tend to be successful in Boston. These are unique concepts: Asian fusion, Peruvian, Greek, a little bit of everything, and it's super, super exciting. So yeah, last 2 years in particular have been really, I think, really good for the Boston culinary scene.
Yeah, booming back after the pandemic. Everyone's in the rebound mode.
Yeah.
So that's great to hear. Like,
more than rebound though, Sother. It's like really like it's one of the cities that's like, for being one of the oldest cities in the United States, they're actually they've pushed a lot in. I've always loved going to Boston just for the fact that it's like there's so much old and so much new happening. Like it pretty much. I mean, like, over the last, like, I don't know, 15 years or maybe longer since I first started going there, I've just kind of noticed it evolving in certain ways. But it still has the foundation of being Boston. So it's like
sure the charm.
The charm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the charm. I don't know. I'm like, I mean, look, Boston exists. It's a beautiful small town. I really, good for them. Plucky little upstart. Hope they make it. But
Yeah.
I want to talk
town.
about Peru. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A fun little college town. One or two sports teams that they won't shut up about.
Well, yeah, we're going to talk about Peru, absolutely, Greg. But the thing is, like, when I think of, we've talked about Pisco for years now, but like over the past year or two, it seems like we've been talking a little bit more about Pisco. And I feel like when you're talking, I just love brandy in general, right? I think that brandy is a great spirit. It's a grape spirit at times. But to me, like, when we're talking about culinary aspects, I feel like when it comes to brandy, I mean, we think about, like, a lot of times with spirits, we're like, all right, we're going to have a cocktail before dinner, and maybe after dinner, and during the course of the meal, we're going to have wine. But brandy is distilled wine. Like, a lot of it, I mean, it can be distilled from different fruits, but, like, predominantly it's grape, right? So, like, it just kind of lends itself to, like, if you're a wine drinker during dinner, but you really want to drink spirits during the meal, brandy makes sense. So Pisco, even being like the cleaner side of brandy, makes even more sense. So I'm really excited to talk about Pisco as well today. So let's get into it. Sorry, I wanted to give that little soundbite there right before we jump into it.
I agree with you all around for what it's worth.
Cool. Thanks, Alex. See, Greg, I got someone on my side.
No, I'm not anti brandy at all. I am pro. This is a pro brandy podcast, definitely.
Absolutely.
But yeah, like, Pisco is an amazing drink. I don't think there's any debate. Clearly, there's no debate among the four of us here about that. But it's one that seems to me like you probably have to. You don't really. It doesn't seem like the sort of thing you just fall into. It seems like the sort of thing you have to kind of like
pursue. Yeah,
pursue, kind of like develop a love of. So I would love to hear a little bit kind of your meet cute with Pisco, Alex, and how this journey started for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot to unpackage there. You're right. I don't think anybody stumbles into this category, and I don't think any sane person who's not Peruvian would just go out there and start a Pisco brand.
No sane person starts a brand, period. I can tell you
this is
personal
true.
Experience.
This is very true. I think it's a different level of insane, I would say, to try to start something in a category that is relatively unknown. I think amongst this group, you obviously know a lot about Pisco, but relative to the average consumer, obviously it's a category that people don't know that much about right now. So we spend most of our time educating, quite a bit of our time educating, and it's, trying to find the right points that we feel like resonate the most with the consumer. To back up, I'll try to be brief, but obviously feel free to ask questions at any point and can go deeper into any particular direction. But the Peruvian part is really what drew me into the category. I was born in Peru, moved to the U.S. when I was a child, and was fortunate to go spend quite a time in Peru growing up as a kid and as an adult as well. Most of my family still lives there, so Pisco's always been in cultural moments for me, in family gatherings and such. And I really knew about as much of it as the next Peruvian did. I knew it was something that was always available and that we liked to drink, but that was really about it. I truthfully, I don't come from the category. I don't have family in the industry or anything. I don't know how relatable this is for some folks, but as an immigrant growing up in the U.S., I think there's this constant pressure to assimilate to American culture and really try to fit in, and that can take on so many different faces. But I felt, going mostly into my adulthood, that I was, despite the fact that I had family in Peru and was visiting quite a bit, I felt like I was becoming increasingly less connected to my home country. And um, I had this nagging. I wanted to do something. It hadn't really taken form of business. It could have been a project. I just wanted to do something that I felt like built a stronger bridge between the U.S. and Peru. And I was fortunate to, it was about late 2016, early 2017. I met my friend and now business partner, Ian, who is a fellow Peruvian who happened to be living in Boston. I had recently moved here to Boston, and we just immediately found common ground over being Peruvians. We worked at the same company. We were the only two Peruvians in the office, which is unsurprising. And we just really, we became good friends. And he moved back to Lima, where he lives now, in 2018. And we stayed in close touch. And every time I was down there, we'd get together and we would just sort of shoot the shit and talk about different things that we could do. He sort of had a similar vision. And it just so happened to be that one day in 2019, early 2019, we were sitting on a patio at a bar in Miraflores, which is really one of the most vibrant areas of Lima. If any of you have been, you might be familiar with it. And we just happened to be drinking a Capitan, which is one of my favorite cocktails. And we started talking about Pisco, and we sort of realized that we were relatively unfamiliar with the category, other than knowing it came from grapes and it came from Peru, and it was delicious. So we decided to get in the car the next day, and we visited one of the, I wouldn't say large because there's really no massive Pisco distillery, but we visited one of the larger ones that was about an hour and a half south of Lima, and we just wanted to learn a little bit more about it. And to make a long story short, that was kind of light bulbs for us after that first visit, and it was purely as a consumer. And we just reached out to every single person in the industry we could possibly get a hold of. And over the course of the next 6 or 7 months, thankfully this all happened before the pandemic, we were I was traveling back and forth, basically once a month for those 6 or 7 months. And we just found that we kept, I have a tendency to over romanticize this, but it's how I feel about it and how I felt about it. We just felt like we were falling more in love with the category the deeper we got into these super remote areas of Peru where people don't normally go to, and they're making this Pisco that's really only for local consumption, and doesn't even have a way to get to the capital city of Lima a few hours north, let alone to American consumers. So we kind of became obsessed with this idea of how can we get this amazing stuff to consumers in the U.S. who are really into nerdy spirits. Kind of like you see it a lot in mezcal. I think is sort of a recent one, and
Sure.
in other categories. I'd say agave in general has done a really good job of focusing on origin and process and product and people. And so, in a sense, we kind of took a page out of that book unintentionally, I think, because again, neither one of us were really super familiar with the spirits category, other than we enjoyed drinking spirits, but we weren't really that familiar with the way that brands had developed.
Step,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So, a natural sort of due diligence trip for us which we ended up making multiple times, was going to Oaxaca. And we were super fortunate to meet a bunch of really amazing people there who just kept giving us recommendations. And similarly, we'd sort of get lost, and next thing you know, you're 4 hours away from Oaxaca Centro, and you're kind of lost. And this is where you're finding this amazing stuff, and you're hearing these amazing stories. And we had just been doing that in Peru, and we're like, oh, cool, this is such a typical thing in Oaxaca too. And we realized that there's so many brands that are doing what we've been trying to build too. And ultimately what manifested was Suyo, which was and still is a platform for artisanal producers to get exposure outside of their local villages, and similarly for consumers in markets where I think they're going to be appreciated the most, have access to them. So we decided to set up Suyo as a platform for small producers. These are family-owned, independently owned, super artisanal producers. And we started off in Lima. We started selling in Lima in late 2021 locally, and we decided to start importing our product in a few months after that, and sort of became officially available in the U.S. with distribution in spring of 2022. And we've been in market for about 2.5 years now, I guess, starting off in New York and slowly expanding into other markets. But as I'm sure you've heard from other founders also, it's definitely this balance of not trying to cast too wide of a net, because we are not only trying to build a brand, but it's arguably more importantly, we're trying to build a category. And we feel like you have to go a mile deep in a very, very, inch wide neighborhood rather than going a mile wide and an inch deep. That's just not as helpful. You're not going to change consumer behavior. You're not going to really build something special. So we've tried to be very hyper targeted and hyper targeted geographically, and sort of we grow outwards has been our approach. And New York was kind of where we planted our flag a couple of years ago. Yeah, I'd say that's the relatively short version of why we started Suyo and kind of how we got to where we are today.
That's awesome, man. And I
Agreed.
I want to ask sort of a question because, like, I've lived in New York for 8 years now, but I still never been to Peru. It's on the list. It's high on the list. I really want to go and check it out. But you said you launched in Lima, which I think is super cool. And because I've never been there, I don't actually know sort of what like the local relationship is to Pisco. Like, is it kind of like, it sounds like it's not like Australia where like no one there actually drinks Fosters. It's more of like Ireland where like everyone there actually enjoys drinking Guinness. And what was it like to sort of break out in that home market and then as phase 2 kind of take it on the road, so to speak, up to New York and break into the American market there? How did you have to kind of like tweak your playbook?
Can I add kind of a second question to that? To just kind of like piggyback on that, it's like you said you were hanging out with your friend on a patio and just enjoying drinks. It's like, to expand on Greg's question, was it like you didn't even, almost like it was so ingrained into the culture that you almost didn't even notice it until you started talking about it? You know what I mean? Like it was just such a regular everyday thing, like that. Then you know what I mean? Okay, I'll let you go.
I think that hasn't really been positioned to me that way before, but that actually sounds right and makes a lot of sense. That's something that's been right under your nose for so long. You were looking past it the entire time. That's exactly right. And to answer your question, Greg, this is a bit of a complicated one because, and it's a great question, what the Peruvian relationship is with Pisco. We, despite being our launch market, which was intuitive because you have to make Pisco in Peru by law, and we have a very strong presence there. My business partner lives there, and I spend a lot of time there. It's definitely not our target market. Not only because obviously Lima is a large city of 10 million people, but that's relatively small compared to what we can do in the U.S. But it's a highly saturated market. If it's kind of like launching a tequila brand living in Jalisco or even Mexico City, where they technically don't produce it. There are thousands of other brands you have to compete with, and thankfully, we've developed something that really resonates with mostly on-premise there so far, because no other brand has gone out there and created a model like this. So we do have that differentiator, but it still is largely it has to be a pretty price-driven market, and that's just not a game that we're interested in getting into. And a lot of pay-to-play, there's no laws like there are here in the United States, where the quote-unquote big brands, there's really 3 or 4 big brands in Lima who just they make sure that they're on just about every single cocktail menu, and they're basically not making money on this stuff. That's just the way it is. And I think what, as a result of that, guys, is as a Peruvian growing up there, you unfortunately get exposed to sometimes some not so great products. Yeah. And despite it being what I believe to be the purest spirit in the world by definition, as with any category, every now and then, unfortunately, you come across adulteration, and it's difficult to police that. So if you're a 15, 16-year-old kid and the drinking age is basically non-existent there, you can go to a bodega around the corner and you can buy a bottle of quote unquote Pisco for like $4. It's not going to be the best stuff. So I think, speaking locally, there's oftentimes a tendency to underappreciate and not even have access to some of the best stuff. But then what's more, I think this exists in any country of the world. There's a tendency to, I think, overappreciate things that are imported into your country and look past what's right in front of you. So I think that's a long-winded way of saying I don't believe historically Peruvians have really appreciated Pisco as much as they should. And I think that's very much part of our vision, is presenting Pisco in a different type of way to people locally and understanding that, wow, this is really such a complex product, and it's so terroir driven that we can't just be talking about Pisco as if it's Pisco. A lot of the education we're doing here, we're also doing in Peru.
It's got to be the similar level of education at play, because if you're in a market that's so flooded with, products that are doing the bare minimum to meet the requirements to be in the category at all, is what I'm trying to say nicely, is, maybe they're not doing the best stuff. But the market is so flooded with that, then that's the choice, right? You're gonna as the consumer pick those almost every time, maybe even just out of even if it's at random. If 9 out of 10 are just this, then what's the chance that the one that's good is going to stand out? So you're having to do just as much education back there as here. But let's talk a little bit about that education about Pisco in general, even for our listener, who I think are pretty savvy drinks folks. Could you dive in a little bit and list some of the parameters that make Pisco what it is? Because I know that there's also controversy out there about Pisco. We were joking a little bit there at the top of the show about, kind of the New York versus Boston. There's a little bit of controversy about Pisco's origins, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you think, and just for the record, I am not from Boston. I live in Boston, so I have no dog in the fight here. But yeah, if you think the Boston versus New York rivalry is at all intense, if you even want to call it a rivalry, it's got nothing on the Peruvian versus Chilean. I think is what you're referring to here. Rivalry as well.
Who's
you said it, not us?
Claiming ownership of the origins.
But to be
beyond
fair,
that,
I was at a Brooklyn Nets versus Celtics game on Christmas Day about 7 years ago. And
how many fights did you see?
A fight broke out in the third quarter, right when they stopped serving beer. I'm not sure if it was anything related with that. So
always related to that.
But then, I just take that as like a kind of like a baseline of what maybe Peruvian Pisco and Chilean Pisco are capable of as far as a rivalry. So let's talk about it.
But so maybe we don't have to dive too deeply into that, but like edify our listener on that bit of rivalry, but also just talk a little bit about Pisco. What are the requirements to put the word Pisco on your bottle?
Yeah, absolutely, would love to. And I would just say one thing to the previous topic we had real quick about the the Peruvian perception of Pisco. Sometimes I think what's promising to me is it actually reminds me a lot of, you think about sort of like millennial Gen X relationship with tequila growing up. I think they're growing up in college. We had some really, really bad tequila available to us. So premiumization has really done wonders for the category over the past decade or so. But I think it took a while for that to happen. And me in particular, I love agave spirits, but I think there's a little bit of a hump I had to get over because tequila reminded me of just terrible hangovers in college. And I think that's something that's very comparable to the Peruvian market. So definitely not insurmountable. And I see a lot of parallels in that sense. So I'll address the Pisco, the Peruvian versus Chilean Pisco things. I'll try to be super brief about this. I try to take a pretty diplomatic approach here. Obviously, I'm Peruvian, so I have an opinion. But I also, I like to read history on this, and I believe what I'm saying here is pretty clear. But always open to feedback. Yes. Pisco's name comes from a port in Peru, which is called Pisco, and this is sort of the birthplace of Pisco. And I think where
that's perfect.
No.
Mic drop.
I actually have spoken to numerous Chilean producers about this because I am one who believes that fighting over it is not beneficial for anyone. I think if we can just be super vocal about educating about the differences between the two, we can all be more successful. The rising tide lifts all ships type mentality. Yes. This is not too dissimilar from what you see in other categories like whiskey. There are different types of whiskey that are kind of confusing to people. This one comes from Scotland. This Scotch comes from Scotland. Bourbon comes from the United States. It's something like that. This is a really complex one though, guys. And basically it all originates with really, obviously Pisco existed, but before I think it was really commercialized. These two countries were at war against each other in the 1800s during the War of the Pacific. And basically what happened was Chile was at war with Bolivia, who was an ally of Peru's. And when that war broke out, Peru had to, just based on an agreement, had to back Bolivia and wound up going to war with Chile combined. That combination of Peru and Bolivia wound up losing that war, and as a result, Bolivia at the time actually had a coast that was taken away from them, and Bolivia is now landlocked because of that war. And Peru lost a little bit of a small bit of its southern coast. Arica is the main city in that area. It used to be Peruvian territory, now it's Chilean territory. And more than anything, of course, lives were lost, which is incredibly tragic. But huge pride hit that we lost a war to the Chileans. So I think that was really the start of it. And then at that time, Peru had already been making pisco. At first, it was wine, which was outlawed by the Spanish government. Peru was no longer allowed to make wine at one point, and it was a restriction that was never put on any other South American countries like Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, etc. Because Peru was making quite good wine. This is actually, now I'm going back to the 1600s, but they had this restriction put on them, and they resorted to making pisco. They resorted to distillation, which the Spanish had brought with them during the Inquisition.
Still got the grapes. You're not going to let them go to waste, right?
That's right. I mean, you had these grapes that were productive for 50, 60 years by the time that the Spanish king said, no, you actually cannot by law make wine anymore. So, okay, what do? We're gonna distill them. We're already making wine, so we're gonna take that must and we're just gonna distill it. So it's not like grappa. We're not using the pomace, the pulp, none of that. It's the actual wine that we no longer are able to use because of this, this law that was made by the king. We're not making pisco with it. Chile saw basically what happened was during the gold rush, Chile saw the commercial success that was happening in the pisco category because ships were coming from Europe and from Asia. They were coming under the port of South America, the tip of South America, coming up to the port of Pisco. And Peru is a huge mining country. Depending on the day, it's first or second largest industry in the country is going to be mining. So what these boats were doing were literally picking up picks and shovels to bring them up to San Francisco, the Bay Area, during the gold rush. And with them, they were picking up these large, what we call botijas, these large receptacles of pisco that was at the time called aguardiente de pisco, of the port of Pisco.
Right.
And eventually got shortened to pisco. But Chileans saw the success that was having, and they started making something similar. And basically, prohibition happened, as we know. But Chile had already wanted to create something similar, and in the 1930s, they renamed one of their cities that was called La Unión at the time. They called it Pisco because they wanted to call their product Pisco too. So that was kind of like a huge gut punch to Peruvians when, there's obviously already some bad blood. And then you're now taking this product that we feel like is uniquely ours and renaming a city of yours.
It's basically so that's like turning it to Springfield.
Like, yeah.
Like
I gotta say though, too. that is a powerful branding campaign of just like, could you imagine just like, all right, here's my plan for Q2 of 2025. We're gonna rename Phoenix Jim Beam City. Like, I think that's really gonna take off here. Like, that is, I mean, it's a shady move, but it's a big swing. So I got to at least give them a little bit of a tip of the hat for that.
Yeah, or the Gulf of America. Imagine.
Yeah,
yeah. Oh my God, jeez! Don't get me started.
Sorry.
No. Too hot.
I think that if that does go through, I think Mexico should rename the Gulf of California the Gulf of Mexico. I think.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Okay, so I have a question. So, or maybe please. Maybe a question / comment on this. Like you mentioned Bolivia and the border lines changing with the coastline and becoming like so. Okay, for the listeners out there, and I kind of want to get back on track with like Chilean Pisco, versus Peruvian Pisco. But in Bolivia, there's friend of the show Steven Soderbergh. He has a company called Singani 63, and so the Singani is essentially an unaged Bolivian brandy made from the same grapes. It's Moscato Alexandria, right? So and with Peru, with Pisco, you're saying Moscato Alexandria, and Chile, Moscato Alexandria. So like, and I like that you threw that out there about like whiskey. It's like, okay, they're all made from grains. Sometimes like in pretty much every whiskey has like some minute level at least of malted barley. So there's a through line there, but like it's, to me, it's kind of even closer, like you'd mentioned before, like with Jalisco and Oaxaca. It's like you're using agave. It's just prepared in a different way. So I feel like you were on your way to say that maybe there was a difference between Peruvian Pisco and Chilean Pisco, even though it's using the same grape. Maybe there's a different vinification or distillation, or is there any kind of, other than appellation or origin, is there any difference between the two,
Right.
other than some bad blood and shit talking?
Yep. All the above, significant differences. And let's just loop in Singani here for purposes of comparison to try to address what the key differences are between the three. The one thing I would say first is I'm glad you brought up the Muscat of Alexandria. I think that is, so that's the one grape varietal that is the through line between the three.
Right.
I believe that's pretty much where the similarities stop between all three of those. And I'll talk about Peruvian Pisco first. To summarize basically what makes Peruvian Pisco unique, I like to basically separate it into three areas. The first is place. You talked about a denomination of origin, so it has to come from one of 5 regions in Peru. The second is going to be product. There's 8 different grape varietals that you can make Pisco from. All 8 of these were brought by the Spanish during the Inquisition. Really 7 of them, and the 8th is a natural mutation that occurred in Peru, so is now uniquely Peruvian. It's the quebranta. And then the third is the process, which is where I think things get very specific and really differentiate Pisco versus these other two. With Pisco, you have, I mentioned the grapes. We make a dry wine, so no residual sugars, and we end up distilling that one time. By law, Peruvian Pisco can only be distilled one time. By contrast, Chilean Pisco, Singani from Bolivia, no limitations on distillation. You could ultimately end up with a vodka type product if you want.
Sure.
With Peruvian Pisco, you're not allowed to have that. And
based on how many times you can distill it, is what you mean by that, right?
That's right. So yeah, so for the listeners, what I mean by that is the more you distill something, the more you're really stripping out the original properties of the raw material. So it tends to lose a lot of its character the more you distill it. And vodka is, I think, as they say, definition odorless, colorless. That's kind of what you would get the more you distilled something. With Peruvian Pisco, you only distill it that one time. So that's why I believe it to be so much more terroir driven. It's more representative of that original grape varietal.
So it needs to be really good wine, basically.
That's right.
Because you're only distilling it once. And is it pot still or column still? Because I think this
great question. Only pot still.
And then Chilean Pisco is typically column still. Am I wrong?
Correct.
Am I right? Okay.
That's right.
Boom. Still got it.
And two type of stills allowed that I would consider pot stills. One is the alembic, and the other one is called the falca, which sits underneath and has as opposed to the gooseneck, has the straight neck. Those are the only two you're allowed to use for Pisco. And then to round it out, with Peruvian Pisco, it has to be distilled to proof. So you're never allowed to add anything else to the product at any point during the process. So certainly no additives, but you can't even proof it down with water. Once it comes off the still, that's where it remains. So there's a lot of skill in cutting the heads and the tails at the right time to make sure you achieve the ABV that you're looking for. And then lastly, with Peruvian Pisco, you must rest it for a minimum of 3 months in neutral containers, but you're not allowed to age it in wood. By contrast, Chilean Pisco can be aged, so you end up with like something like a cognac, or like an Armagnac, which listeners might be familiar with. Singani, I actually can't say definitively whether they are or are not allowed to age. I'm not sure. I think they might be able to. I don't really see it often.
I think they're allowed, but they just don't, because it's more of like a get it out there kind of situation. And it really is like more of like a people's drink, and it's not necessarily meant to be like, so it's preciously like kind of handled as like an aged spirit. Even though it's great stuff, and it has a really great place in the unaged spirit category. It's more like all right, let's drink this right now. Let's not wait.
And I think they're allowed to use the pomace as well. So
Yeah.
they're not just using the wine must.
Can I ask you about that then, Alex? I have to say that for as many years as I've been drinking Pisco and enjoying all the nuance of it, I don't think I've ever had, never ever say never ever. That's from McGruber. But you rarely see, well, first, like Pisco is a small category in spirits in the United States, which we're working on, just brandy in general, like building that up. But man, what's really cool is like being able to have the actual wine that makes the product, and there's certain ways of thinking about this with brandy, right? With any wine distillate. Some wines, especially like when you're talking cognac, like Uni Blanc doesn't make that great of a wine, but it makes a hell of a distillate, So there's that kind of thing. But I always love like when you're in Italy and you have like a grappa that's made from like Barolo, and you're like, oh well, Barolo is baller, so why not turn it into brandy and make it even more baller? What is your experience with Muscat of Alexandria is the wine before distillation? Because like I said, I've never actually had the pleasure of or experience of getting to try it out.
Yeah. So great points and questions. In Peru, we're doing it. I think it's really exciting that, the reason that it exists that way was there's a lot of history for that. We're using the wine to distill because we were not allowed to actually bottle the wine for decades, and that culture just sort of dissipated. And what you're seeing now is a really cool resurgence of of Peruvian winemakers who, yeah, of course, they're mutually exclusive. You can't make a Pisco and a wine from the same grape, but you're seeing winemakers who I'll still call winemakers even when they're making Pisco because they are making wine first.
Right.
You're seeing them start to commercialize, dedicate more of their harvest to winemaking. And of course, it's still a Pisco-dominated industry, but there are some producers who have really the past 10, 15 years who have been making really good wines, and some of them using the same varietals as Pisco making. You mentioned the Muscat of Alexandria. In Peru, we call that the Italia, which is a terribly named grape. And we've spoken to the Peruvian government about changing this quite a few times, but they don't really want to budge. A couple Italian men, they say, during the 1800s were the first to start selling the Pisco that was made from this varietal. But and so the locals started calling it Italia, but it has nothing to do with the country of Italy. It came from Spain. It is that Muscat of Alexandria grape. But I know a couple producers who are making really, really good wine from Italia. What I think emphasize for listeners who are interested in Peruvian wine is that the ones that I feel like have gained the most commercial success outside of the country are the natural wines. So Pisco basically is, most producers are making a natural wine first. There's not a law that says that you can't use commercial yeast, but the vast majority of producers, including us, are using 100% spontaneous fermentation. So ambient yeast that's just available in the atmosphere. And we feel like that's so much part of our terroir story. So because that culture, I think, exists, it's resulted in winemaking that follows similar practices. And the ones that I've tried that I like the best are the ones that come from that Muscat of Alexandria or close to it. So the Italia or the Moscatel, which is actually a derivative of it. That are actually, they're orange. They end up being orange wines, a lot of skin contact, and are really, really quite delicious. And we know a couple of producers who are making Pisco and those wines. So I think you need to give a little bit of time to see what could come of it. But there's also the reality that you said that some grapes are better for like a Pisco, a distillate, than for a wine. It's important to understand geographically where Peru is. It's, Chile and Argentina, for instance, further south, those are within those parallels where winemaking typically tends to be more conducive for wine production. Being further north in super, super arid, dry climate, that's going to impact the grapes much differently.
It's funny you say that too, because like Argentina is known for Malbec, which is actually a French varietal, but it's like the world just got we started exploring our options, and moving around a little bit, and we all ended up in New York. But so okay, but that on that note, like I feel like so many people like. Yeah, there's this cool thing that has happened with spirits and spirits enthusiasts, especially us who work in the industry. For a couple decades now, we've always loved to see and experience the origin of like where these distillates, these spirits come from. I love tasting the wines that go into brandy. I love tasting essentially the beer that gets turned into whiskey. And even on a eh, eh, I love apple brandy, especially living when I moved up to the Northeast, like tasting the cider and then tasting the apple brandy after, and like any kind of eau de vie, really, and it's like understanding like the way that it transforms in the still and in the glass, especially like things like, framboise, Paul Williams, like they're so cool. Like when you get that real like floral essence of it. So to me, it's like being able to taste like the Muscat of Alexandria and then like relate that back to the spirit is kind of a cool thing that I wish I could experience more. But on that note, it seems like Pisco, as many other spirit categories, have been rising to the top because, like, first of all, you have consumers who are, well, one, you have bartenders who are selling, basically hand selling products and putting them on the menus. But then you have customers at the bars and consumers who are reading the articles online and whatnot, and they're like, "Well, I've never had a pisco sour." So then they get into that. Like, actually, I was at a dinner party about 3 months ago, and it was all Peruvian. And guess who was on drink duty? This guy, because even though I haven't been behind the bar in a few years, they were like, "Hey, yeah, Damon, so you're gonna make pisco sours, right?" And I was like, "Let me stretch real quick, because I'm coming out of the dugout." But it was awesome, because like it reminded me, like, one, like how awesome that drink is, first of all, but I went around and kind of like taught them about Pisco and what it is and kind of like what we're doing today, right? And it was so much fun to educate people on a spirit category that, the rest of the time we were drinking wine. And I was like, dude, you realize this is distilled wine. I mean, obviously different varietals, but it's like, this is really like, to me, like you kind of said this at the beginning of the show, kind of the most natural progression as far as it goes for a distillate, like we started making wine first, right? Started making beer first. So like whiskey and brandy kind of seem to be, I mean, rum too, because obviously it's sugar and that's what ferments. But I don't know, to me, like, especially unaged brandy, like Pisco is like one of those things where I've been serving it at like gatherings for the last like couple years, just like, hey, try this, like,
yeah,
it's, it's a crusade that you've taken up, to like turn people onto it. But I don't know, I just think it's one of the most fascinating spirits that exists. It
Right, and it's largely kind of misunderstood, and
yeah,
it's been around forever, yet we're still seeing it as a new product. So
it's
what I
ancient
guess then,
aliens, dude.
yeah. What about this category, Alex, makes you think that Pisco is that now is the time?
Yeah. So, Damon, you made a lot of good points there that are
Thank you
good segues to this exact topic. I think you alluded to many points that we make sure to emphasize because we feel like we have such a really good opportunity right now, and we feel like we have the consumer's attention right now. And one thing that I would say is the word brandy isn't even in our vocabulary. We don't use that word with any of our positioning. for a couple of reasons. One, I think it has a certain connotation, whether good or bad, with consumers, that we feel like
It's
takes the
sweet.
consumer in a direction, that we're not trying to go with our messaging. But then secondly, I just feel like fundamentally its production is so unique relative to the other brandies out there that it's just not comparable. And we want people to know Pisco as Pisco. Of course, by definition, anything made from fruit is a brandy, but Pisco is such a unique product that we don't use the word brandy. In terms of why we feel
but Alex, like, sorry to stop you there, but like, man, just for devil's advocate, it's like this is what we do here. We need to change the vocabulary and the consumer kind of idea of, and not just for consumers, but for people even in the industry who might not understand the full spectrum of what brandy is. It's not a bad word. It's not a 4-letter word. It's actually
totally.
It's important for the history of distilled spirits and even winemaking or even fruit distillates, all of it together. Brandy is I'm on my own personal crusade just to get brandy back at the positive vocabulary for all of us, because God damn it, it's really great. And I'm sorry to just jump in
it's
here,
kind of like
Alex,
I've talked to some mezcal producers who were like, we had to describe it as smoky at first, because if we described something as funky in 2010, nobody was going to fucking buy it. But people like smoke, people already knew. We already knew people liked Scotch, so we described it as smoky. And then 10 years later, we sort of back away from that. So is that I guess is that a long view for you to maybe the consumer will get there with brandy, but they're not there yet. So we got to just kind of meet people where they are, essentially.
I mean, you say it to V, I guess.
Great question. We view this as category design. We are obviously people like you who have experienced Pisco, have familiarity with it, but we feel like such a large percentage of the population we interact with has no idea what it is. So we have an ability to control the narrative, and for better or for worse, but we've taken the positive approach, and we feel like we can put a stake down as to how people are going to be interacting with it for the first time. So Pisco is Pisco. Let me tell you why it's unique, and not great parallel I'll draw to, because I think it hasn't resulted in a great thing for the categories. I feel like, just based on talking to people, the average consumer often doesn't know, and a hilarious study came out about this recently, that they don't know that cognac is a brandy. But then what's more, so many consumers of Hennessy, for instance, don't even realize they're drinking a cognac. So that's an example.
You're 2 degrees away from the point you're trying to make already. So you may as well take a stance that just doesn't start there. You don't have to start at the beginning with everything.
Yeah.
I don't need to know that eggs are where chickens come from. You know what I mean? I can enjoy a delicious chicken dish, right?
That's right. So to get back on track a little bit, I would say the reason why we think that the timing is really excellent for us is, I'll say maybe two main themes here. The first is just the massive changes in consumption habits we've seen over the past few years, and I believe will continue to happen. And a consumer has arisen that I'll refer to as a conscious consumer, whatever that means to you. I think of sort of like three main pillars that sit within that conscious consumer. And it's, I think, someone who tends to be making more socially conscious decisions, tends to be making more health conscious decisions, and then tends to be making more environmentally conscious decisions. This is where we start getting into potentially more at the brand level, or how we communicate at Suyo. But if we want to start off with socially conscious, we feel like people are looking for story. People are looking for something that's a little bit different. And for us, it was organic because we were excited by this model anyway. But I think communicating origin and the producers we work with, and what makes it unique, and how we do a revenue share with our producers, I think these types of things tend to resonate with consumers now who are looking to drink better. They may be drinking less, as the data says, potentially, but
100%.
They do want to drink better. So there's kind of the socially conscious angle that we feel like is a really good tailwind for us. And then there's the health conscious angle, which I'm always going to be cautious with the way that I position, because as the Surgeon General said a couple weeks ago, we need to be, this is a point for another time. I would obviously love to sit in a room and debate this with him, but if you want to drink better for your lifestyle, I'm of the belief that there's no better no better product than Pisco because it's 100% grapes with nothing else added to it by law. There are other categories who can do that too. We talked about mezcal here, for instance, but there's no law that says you have to do that. You're allowed to proof it down, get into tequila, additives. That's a whole nother animal. Yes, you can have a fully natural expression, but you do not by law have to have that. Pisco, at least you know what you are going to get. And we feel like that's a really positive, we're talking functional benefits for people. And then the third one I would say is environmentally conscious, which is one that we don't want to greenwash. We don't want to over communicate this, but we talked about how it's great. I think, Damon, you were asking the question about how winemakers started making grappa or marc or orujo, depending on what country you're in. They're utilizing most of the grape. In Peru, the culture is such that, we don't have that other thing because we've used the thing, but we have all this leftover pomace, we have all this leftover pulp. Most producers that we have interacted with, and certainly the ones we work with, are utilizing 100% of the grape. So once you're done with making the must to distill, that pomace is still rich in nutrients, and you can reapply it to the field. So we can truly say we're upcycling, we're using 100% of the grape. It's an inherently wasteful process to make the Pisco, but we can reutilize the leftover. So those are some of the key themes that I think consumers like to hear about that are both category and brand specific. And then I would say the other one is just the rise in Peruvian gastronomy. I think this is something that, we've been talking about Peru a little bit here. People are becoming more familiar with Peruvian culture. And I think a lot of that is being driven by the restaurant scene. It's been on fire the past few years. 2023, 4 of the top 50 restaurants in the world were based in Lima, Peru, the highest concentration of any city in the entire world. There's a lot of eyeballs on Peru in that sense. And culture, what's the word I'm looking for here? Gastronomic tourism is very popular. So we're taking advantage of that. We've been doing this informally forever, but we formalized our tours to the vineyard, where we have programs where Americans can come visit Peru. They can be in Lima, they can take a day trip to our vineyards, and we want them to experience the origin, because what better way to come back and I've been to this place. I think this has really been great for the agave category. You can get on a flight, you can get to Jalisco, you can get to Oaxaca. We need to make Lima more approachable, and that excites people. We're under no impression that obviously Peru is a much smaller country than Mexico, and it's not connected literally at our southern border, so it's not as easy to get to. But we just feel like there's the Peruvian gastronomy boom has been really good for us. What better way to follow that up than introducing you to the national spirit of Peru? And as it was talked about at the very beginning of this meeting, is I think pairing, whether it was mentioned or just talking about with food, it's such a great pairing spirit. And we want people to understand the complexity, how the depth that exists within Pisco. And even for cocktail making, every single one of the events we do, it's always going to be a pairing. We want it to be a spirit of gastronomy. We want it to be in the moment with you at the table with your food. This isn't something you rip shots of. This is something that you, as they say in Peru, you tomar a besos. So you're kissing it. You're not drinking it. We want people to approach it that way, much like a wine. It's a very terroir-driven, complex spirit. So obviously there's a lot of points there that thankfully I appreciate you giving me the venue to dive into all of them.
Absolutely.
And nerd out a little bit, but obviously I don't have the opportunity to be as verbose with the average consumer. So it's about tightening the messaging and finding the key themes that resonate the most.
No, man, you nailed it all, actually. And it's almost lunchtime here in not so sunny California today, but I'm like, man, give me some lomo saltado and some pisco, and I'm good. That's gonna be lunch today.
Before we wrap up, which we're close to doing here, Alex, you mentioned that 4 of the top 50 best restaurants in the world were in Lima. I'm curious, did you knock on their doors? Are you on their bars?
Every one of them, sir. Yeah, that's very important for us. We want to, as I said, Lima is there's a lot of Pisco brands in the market. So it's not really the best use of our time to be fighting for placement with them. And we're at a different price point in most cases as well. So we're very focused in where we want to be. We want to be in restaurants and in liquor stores too, where that conscious consumer tends to live. And a lot of tourists end up going there too, who are going to come back to what has been our target market of the United States. So we want to make sure we're at all those places.
Cool.
Yeah, I totally get that. I grew up on the coast of the Gulf of America. And we get a ton of great, fresh, beautiful seafood that comes right out of the water, and then all gets packaged up and shipped away, and we eat sort of the leftovers, right? I get it. I understand that, like, maybe the common person in the area where the product is made is not getting the best of it, because the best of it's going off to a market where it'll command a higher price or get more attention. So I totally understand that weird economic dynamic. But I also see that you're making efforts to create some inroads to get a better product into the locals' hands too. And that's great.
And if I might just super quick, Sother, dive into that point, because this truthfully was a very, very a driving force for us when we were developing Suyo, is that exact point you made there, that Peru is, by definition, if not one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. There's so many, whether it be superfruits or just really, really high quality foods that are coming from Peru, that in other products too, like Pima cotton, that are for textiles, that get exported out of the country, and the Peruvian consumer doesn't get to access it. And Peru, I think, is largely known as a primary ingredient country rather than a value-added country. And we feel that Peru has gotten the short end of the stick in so many situations. Take quinoa, for instance. The locals have been eating this for thousands of years, and now they've been priced out of their own product because the rest of the world loves it so much. This is something that has always really nagged at me and at my business partner Ian, and we feel like Pisco is such an amazing example of what can be, and that it's homegrown, and then it's also fully developed. It's fully produced in Peru. And look, we have the beauty of the biodiversity that's made in the agricultural practices that's made the grapes, and then we had it's such a melting pot. We had distillation that was brought by the Spanish and in native lands and native labor that's put it together, and what resulted was a pisco that's a blend of many different things, and that's what Peruvian culture really is. And so is everybody. So anyway, there's a bit of a chip on our shoulder, I think, in that sense, that really, really excited us about starting Suyo to shine a brighter light on that dynamic.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're excited to follow along and watch your successes grow. And speaking of that, how can our listener tune into your channels and see what you're up to? Where can we view you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So we're on Instagram at Suyo Pisco, SUYOPISCO. And our website is just same, www.suyopisco.com. We are in the process of relaunching it, which is exciting. We'll have a much more user-friendly Find Us tab. So that'll help you find the locations where we are in all of our key markets. Right now, it's about 6 months out of date. You can get a good sense for where we are. But that will be coming soon. And then you can also purchase on our website there too. There is a buy now function. We can ship it directly to your home.
Amazing.
Awesome. That's fantastic, man. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us and walking us through the history of Pisco and this amazing spirit. And it was so good. I'm going to forgive the fact that you called this a meeting at one point and not a podcast.
I was going to say
I'm
something.
so sorry.
Like, how dare you, sir? No.
Can we edit that part out?
Well, not after this.
Not
now.
now.
Not now that we've made a beat out of it. But seriously, man, thank you. This was awesome and super informative and just super cool to get to hang out with you. I appreciate you coming by the studio.
Yeah.
Thank you all for having me. And for those who are in New York, I know at least, I know Sother is. Greg, you're in New York as well?
Oh yeah, baby.
Would be awesome too. And Damon, when I find my way out to the West Coast, would love to get together and have a drink of Pisco with you all.
Hey man, I'm in the Bay
Let's
Area.
do it, man.
That's where the gold rush people came through and started banging out Pisco sours. So
come on May the 4th. We'll all be over at Grand Army celebrating their 10th anniversary.
That's right. Yeah.
Amazing.
Back
and I think we'll have to have Damon have a Pisco punch together as opposed to a Pisco sour.
Absolutely. Love that.
Let's get into it.
All right.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, we'll get those on the books. But for now, that is going to do it for us this week on The Speakeasy. Thank you so much for listening. And be sure to tune into heritageradionetwork.org for many more great programs just like this one. And if you want more of the three of us, as always, you can become a regular on our Patreon. We're going to get lots of cool stuff like bonus episodes, video podcasts, free cocktail kits every month from our friends at Shaker and Spoon, and lots more good stuff. We got a link to that in the show notes, and be sure to tune in next week when we're going to have, I'm excited about this. We got Richie and Kevin coming in from Hero Bar, which is in Nairobi, Kenya. Wow. So that's going to be really dope. A topic that I am super excited to become more knowledgeable about and dive into. So that's going to be great. Be sure to tune in. But until next time, Cheers, everybody.
Cheers, everybody.
Salud.
So you don't charm the devil with your rock.
The Speakeasy is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food and drink radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
I'm admitting here and now I have a crush on another podcaster. It's called The Sporkful, and it's hosted by Dan Pashman, who's also the inventor of the pasta shape cascatelli. Why do I love Dan so much? What is this crush about? He obsesses about food to learn more about people. Dan explores what's so special about a shallot. Should you eat fast food on vacation? Is halal pork impossible? This is a podcast that's not just for foodies. It's actually for eaters. Listen to The Sporkful wherever you get your podcasts. I know you'll be full and satisfied.